Assalamualaikum and good morning. My name is Nur Atika binti Zulkifli. My matrix number is 053492. So, for research proposal, our group chose factors influencing low English speaking competence among UNISA TESOL students. So, for this chapter, we need to complete the proposal, which is contains 3 chapters. So I am in charge for chapter 1, which is introduction. So in introduction, we have 9 elements, which is introduction, background of the study, problem statement, research aim, research objective, research questions, significance of the study, limitation of the study, and the last one is summary. So for the first one, introduction, we plan to explain and give definition and mostly talk about speaking, what is speaking, and etc. The next one is background of the study. Third is problem statement, which is our problem statement must to investigate the factors influencing low English speaking competence among UNISA TESOL students. And then research aim, which is the same one with the problem statement. Next, research objective, which is to identify the UNISA TESOL students' perspective on low English speaking competence. And then move on to research questions, to the significance of the study, the limitation of the study, and the last one is summary. So as the summary for chapter 1, this study is more to students' development in speaking skill, since it is a significant skill nowadays that everyone should master this skill. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, so Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ainun Najihah binti Arifin, 053462 for matric number, and I am from TESOL 4A. Okay, regards to our proposal, I'm going to proceed with the chapter 2, which is literature review. For our literature review, it tells about our review and after deep examination of the literatures that associated in our entire research process, which in our literature review, we chose a hypothesis, a theory, and several recent studies by 2016 and 2019 from researchers all over around the world. Okay, for the hypothesis, we chose the creation hypothesis, but we indicate more on its content, which is acquisition and learning hypothesis under the five monitor model of creations monitor models 1970. So in this hypothesis, we employs on acquisition and learning hypothesis, which describes one's language development under 2 different systems, which is acquisition and learning. Okay. And for the theories, which we employs on SLA factors under language learning and acquisition, and SLA theories. In these theories, we employs more on the main 2 factors involved in SLA, which is social and psychological. It is because that we our research aim is to reveal or figure out factors influencing low speaking competence among UNISA tested students. So we predict that the factors may be under psychological and social factors, as we assume that maybe the factors will be from these two because it is really related, and it also consists of sub-content that convince us to choose them to be our base in our research. Okay, so for the last literature review, we will focus on several recent studies that we refer to in order to complete our research that conducted recently by 2016 and until 2019 by some researchers from Malaysia, also from the other country as well. Okay, now we're going to proceed with the question stories. Under question stories, we mentioned that we chose acquisition learning hypothesis, right? Okay, under this hypothesis, it describes about one's language development under two different systems in two different purposes, which means that I'm going to describe it one by one. The first one is acquisition system. Acquisition system describes of one language development naturally. It means that they learn a language, or simplified that called as picking up the language, acquire the language by a subconscious process. It means that they focus on the meaning rather than the form. It naturally happens, or maybe or simply can be understand that when we were kid, we let's say that we are exposed to a community or our family use the second language um, in daily communication. So we subconsciously learn the language, acquire the language without going to actual classes to learn the language. Okay, that is called as acquisition in naturally with a subconscious process. Okay, in the other hand, we have learning system. It happens with a conscious learning, means that a person learn have intention to learn the language. Mean they have a conscious process. They go maybe they go to actual classes, or maybe they have a practicalism in use the language to their community. Means that they use the language in order to learn the language well. They learn the input, and the input mentioned is the grammar rule, the syntax, all the language components in order to learn the language well, in order to gain the knowledge. And also under this learning system, we use more cognitive process rather than apart with acquisition system, because acquisition we just learn it naturally without thinking, without have anxiety or thinking or scared to be wrong in using language. But in learning system, we have kind of an expector in our cognitive process that will ensure that our utterance is correct according to the inputs that we learn. The inputs is the rules and the grammars and etc. We chose this hypothesis to be linked to our research is that because we assume that, as we mentioned in the introduction, we assume that the factors that influencing low speaking competence among university students maybe come from these two systems, because we assume that maybe our side more maybe that they have the problems with their learning systems, means that they didn't get enough enough inputs delivery from the teacher in the past. Maybe they in acquisition system, maybe they do not maybe did not did not get to expose with second language environment naturally when they were kid. Maybe they have some problem regards to the two system, because these two system determine one's language development. Okay, so now we're going to proceed with the section 2.2, which is on language acquisition learning. Oh, sorry, language acquisition and SLA theories. Under these theories, it actually we take this theory to be in our baseline, because first it conveys that question theory is really linked to our research, as these theories and creation hypotheses they link together. It kind of have a similar perception, but this theory it has a, a kind of deeper explanation and deeper content. Alright, under this theory, we we integrate more on its major two factors, which is psychological and social, that involve in SLA or second language acquisition. Yes, these theories like seems like integrate more on acquisition, but also we can link to the learning context too, because under this psychological and social context there will be a sub-content that related to the system and creation theories, and also factors that could be related to factors that we may found in our research. Okay, these two factors involve in second language acquisition under language acquisition and learning, language acquisition and SLA theories. Now I'm going to explain one by one the factors mentioned. Okay, the first factor is psychological. Psychological, it describes more into the internal factors. Internal factors means that we could not see it happens to one's learners in second language acquisition process or learning. It is because they feel it themselves by themselves. Means that these factors integrate or consists of feelings, mental process, cognitive process of one's learner in order to acquire or learn the language apart from the native language. For example, not for example, sorry, under the psychological factors, it has a several sub-content, which is intellectual processing, memory, motor skills, motivation, and attitude. All of this happens in internal factors of a learner. In order to learn a language or acquire a language, we must have a good psychology condition in order to learn it well. Because if we have problems in these factors, we might not be able to acquire or learn the language well. For example, if we have problem regards to intellectual processing, we may face problem in order to manage input that we acquire or will either acquire or learn well. Uh, Apart from that, if we have motor skills problem, we could not utter correct pronunciation of the language acquired or learned. If we have memory disorder, we could not retain memory of the input learned of the language, of input acquired of the language. And if we have low motivation and attitude in order to learn the language or acquire the language, we might not be able to do so, because these psychology factors really determine our succeed in order to learn or acquire a language. For example, a girl have problem, she is good with the language, but she has problem about using the language to others, means that she have somewhat called anxiety or feelings or low self-confidence to use the language. Yes, it could be taken under the psychological factors. In practical or before or practically, let's say that she has problem in order to remember or retain the inputs learn regards to the second language. Okay, now we'll be going to the social factors. Social factors, also known as the external factors, means that condition or maybe somewhat event happens around our environment. Under social factors, it has several sub-content too. It has natural, classroom, and community contact. Social factors in SLA is really important because when we acquire or when we want to acquire or learn a language, we must have a good exposure to the language. For example, natural exposure. If you don't if you do not get to expose to a natural environment that use the language well, it may be hard to acquire or learn the language. For personally, um, when I was a kid, I am from a rural area kid, so my family and my neighborhood do not use English. They use Bahasa instead. So I just learn and acquire English by watching television and also going to school. And that is can be taken to social factors because I interact with television and also at school I have teachers and my friends. It could be social factors. I have a social contact with them in order to learn and acquire the language. Okay. Other than natural sub-content, we have here um, classroom and community context. Community context related to the example that I mentioned, and classroom. Classroom, we assume that our subject may have problem regards to their past classroom, what we call classroom language delivery by the teachers. Means that maybe they have problem, maybe not problem, maybe their teacher is not was not use correct approach in order them to learn well, or maybe themselves they themselves did not use the language or did not practice the language in order to gain a fluent and accurate language use for the current use. For example, maybe when they were a student in primary school or maybe a secondary school, they learn the language, they get the social factors, they have a specific English classroom, but they just learn in the classroom. They did not use the language out of a classroom context. They did not socialize with their friends with the language. So we assume that these factors strongly linked to our research is that because our subject probably have problems in the social factors in order to learn the language, so that they have problems in speaking competence in the current time. Um, as I mentioned, they may have problem related to social contacts. So basically, both psychological and socials really hold a big role in determine language competence in the future. So we take these theories and also the question stories to build into our research as our framework is that because they may be the major they may determine the major factors that we may found in our research in the next implementation process. Okay, now we're going to proceed with the recent studies for section 2.3. Okay, for the recent studies, as mentioned in the introduction, we place on several studies by 2016 to 2019. Okay, so I'm going to explain it briefly about the research, um, about their aims and the results. Okay, so the first research that we examine to be linked to our research is conducted in 2016 by a researchers from Gaza, Palestine. The researcher mentioned is Dr. Ahmad Mahir Mahmud Al-Nakhala in an open university in Gaza. It explored the research of the aim of this research is exploring difficulties in speaking faced by the English student through a survey method. It used mix qualitative and quantitative method as it have interviews and questionnaires in order to gain the result. Okay, as it aims to explore difficulties faced by English language students in the university, the result reveals that there are several difficulties faced by the English language student in speaking context. They are fear of mistake, shyness, anxiety, and lack of confidence. Okay, this result of the research of this study um, are linked to the research is because as I mentioned just now, it basically about internal factors. They have fear of making mistake, they have shyness in order to use the language, and also and lack of confidence in the language. Means that it all these difficulties may fall under psychological factors in our research. That's why we chose it to be one of the research that we refer that link to our study in order to reveal or to figure out the actual factors influencing low speaking competence to our subject, which are UNISA test student. Dr. Ahmad Mahir Mahmud Al-Nakala 2016 recommend that learners should practice the language in order to cope this problem. So the recommendation also can be linked to our discussion and recommendation at the end of our project paper as well. So that is because it is proven that this research is linked to our research and suitable to be chosen as one of our recent studies. Okay, so now we're going to proceed to the next research or next study. Next study conducted in 2017 about correlation between student anxiety and student speaking skills at English department student of the University of Ponorogo, Indonesia. It conducted by a few lecturers of the Fakultas Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan Universitas Muhammadiyah Ponorogo. Researchers mentioned are Harry Susanto, Rizky Angkati Ayunintas Palupi, and Diah Atik Mustikawati. The researchers describes anxiety as an uncontrollable state that can make the language learning situation problematic and stressful. Before they apply this research, they predict that anxiety and English speaking skill or competence have special correlations, mean that anxiety can determine English speaking result. So they hold a research with a methodology of quantitative data collecting. They use questionnaires and also questionnaires about student perspective in speaking English and also student achievement in speaking skills. Along the research, they put anxiety of the student as variable X and the result, which is variables Y, as the speaking skill and by the end of the result, the researchers figure out that there are correlation between variable X and variable Y, which that if variable X anxiety is high, variables Y will be low, the speaking competence of the student will be low, and in vice versa, means that if the variable X is low and the variables Y is high, so it means that there is a correlation between anxiety and speaking skills among these students. Thus, anxiety believed to be a major factor of affecting or influencing English speaking skill. So by the end of research, the researchers also suggested that students who want to cope this problem or student want to cope this problem need to hold their anxiety feelings and try and making effort to improve the English speaking skills by practically use it in order to increase the speaking skills. Means that students been suggested by the researcher to improve the English speaking skill by holding down their anxiety and try to be always practice with the speaking skill in order to improve well. So this research link to our studies because they apply on anxiety. Then anxiety can be classified under the psychological. As mentioned, we apply on psychological in our research. So the result of this study uh, could also be one of our major results at the end of the research. Okay, the third study conducted in 2019 recently in analyzing factors that cause low speaking performance among English students. The researchers mentioned were Yupika Maransha and Bemi Haryani 2019. Yes, also from Muhammadiyah University, but in a different region, which is Bengkulu, Indonesia. When we were doing our deeper examination to several recent study before choosing a few to be taken as the base of recent studies, we um, we read the title of the research first. And when it comes to this research, this 2019 research that I just mentioned, the titles really link to our research. As as our research is about in figure out factors influencing the speaking skill in user test student, and this research also about factors of low English speaking in their English students. So that is the first reason why we chose this as the main recent studies that we refer in order to complete our research. And also this besides the aims and the result of this study really convey us to put it in our main recent study because it aims to search for the factors of low speaking skill as I mentioned, and also the objectives of this study also kind of similar to us, means that they integrate on the factors and also the perspective of the student towards English speaking skills, and the result also linked to our research because they they describe the result into two major factors. The major factors are the internal and the external factors. As mentioned in SLA factors, we also applies on internal and external factors, which are psychological and social. So it is similar. The result of the research may be found also in our research. Plus, of this, the research also believed to be relevant because it applies on student in their fourth semester, and we decided to apply our research to fourth semester to students who are in their fifth semester. I'm sorry. So the result between this research and our future result may be pretty similar and correlated. So we could describe or we could have a good result because we have correlated studies to refer to. So we can conclude a good result based on the recent studies like this one. Okay, so even they use qualitative method, which is they use these descriptive methods from few recent studies. Yeah, the result of these studies also may be found similar to our study in next stage of implementation. And by the end of the research, the researchers suggested or described the major factors that cause low English speaking skill is internal factors. Okay, this result of this research related to the previous recent study that I mentioned by Dr. Mahmoud Al-Nakhala. It conveys that psychological plays a big role in determining English speaking skill. And by the end of the research, the researcher also suggested that these two, internal and external factors, determine English speaking skill of the student, and in order to improve or or deal with the factors, the student needs to increase their effort in order to improve the English speaking skills, but other than just to wait others to other than just to wait for the inputs to come, means that someone teach them how to improve it. They have to make effort by themselves in order to improve the language skills, well, especially speaking skill, because speaking skill is really important, mostly for the tertiary level of student in their tertiary level, because we use English to communicate in education terms and etc. Okay, now we're going to the fourth study. The fourth study is conducted in Malaysia in 2018 of Faculty of Education. The researchers are Rusina Rusli, Malumat Yunus and Harwati Hashim 2018. The study conducted in order to highlight issues happen regards to low speaking competence, low speaking proficiency among Malaysian students. The research applies on quantitative methodology where they use questionnaires as the method in order to collect the data. Also, they use qualitative method, which is interviews, in order to collect the data too, which means that this study use mixed method in order to produce result. So by the end of the result, the researchers reveals that management in teaching management in teaching psychology, as well as teachers and peers influence, were the factors that contribute to the low speaking proficiency of English among the Malaysian undergraduated. This means that management in teaching psychology, as well as teachers and peer influence, means that they related to the past experience of English learning and acquisition. This is linked to our research, which we mentioned in SLA factors that applies on past experience in learning and acquire language might determine the factors in influencing those English speaking skill. So with the result of the research, they said that management management in teaching psychology, as well as teachers and peers influences, means that the result conveys that major factors that influence a low English speaking skill among these students is because of their past experience in English learning with their past teacher, management in teaching, and also peer influence. Peer influence is where that they did not practically use the language with their peer. So their peer will use bahasa instead of the language. So if they practically use it more than the language, as I mentioned, the competence will probably reduce as they use bahasa more than the language. So at the end, at the end of the research, the researchers suggested that teachers in schools or any institution need to play a big role in create or apply a suitable approach in order to student to learn the language best, and also the student themselves need to encourage themselves to use the English well. Yes, it might it may be a problem in order to use other than native language with peers. Maybe their peers will say that why you use that in language, you're not even the native speaker of the language. Or in Malay, kenapa awak guna bahasa tu sedangkan awak bukannya orang English pun. Like that. So they must encourage themselves to practically use it. It's okay to use it slowly, because we may influence our peers to use the language as well, because the language, which is English, is really important to be used aside from bahasa. Bahasa is, yes, it is the most important, but also English. It is also important to be to be also important to have a good competence of this language as well. Plus, if we were a student, and also now English is a common language used by Malaysian instead of Bahasa Malaysia. Actually, the two language is important. As mentioned from the MBI and MBM MBI terms by the Education Ministry of the Education. Okay, last but not least, a research conducted in 2016 and succeed to be published in 2017, completed by collaboration between our our Malaysian lecturer and a lecturer from Gulen, Russian, Iran. The study aims to establish the need to focus on factors affecting learners' English speaking skill. It aims on several issues regard to English speaking skills, but one of the aims, which is which is factors affecting the speaking performance, is linked to our research. Why is that? Because it applies on figure out what is the factors of the speaking performance affected. So by the end of the research, the qualitative methodology applied, which is interviews and also appropriate speaking questions. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The research applies on qualitative method, which they analyze few recent studies of speaking competence related to speaking competence, and they produce a result which describes that appropriate speaking instruction was found to be the learner's priority and a field in which they need more attention to be focused on in order to have a good performance in speaking in English. And to be linked to this research, a research conducted by Ni Putuyanti Cahyasari 2018 reveals that self-efficacy and English speaking skill have significant correlations, means that teaching and learning that should be more creative to make student efficacy using media or strategy that student do not feel bored in class. To be simplified. To be simplified from these two study, which the 2017 study and the 2018 study mentioned, it tells us that self-efficacy no, tells that self-efficacy and appropriate speaking instruction is the need of one in order to have a good speaking skill competence. Also, a good and best teaching approach implemented is important in order to make sure the student learn well, and also the student effort is important. Tell it with the teaching approach implemented by the teachers. Mean that two effort from the teacher and effort from the student is correlated and important to produce a good English speaking competence. this research linked to our study is because that in our questionnaire, there will be questions about past and current teaching and learning about English, right? So the result of the research conveys that we probably meet the same perspective and causes from our research as well, because we predict that our subject will choose the answer that conveys low they have um, low self-efficacy in order to learn English, and also they have lacking in past teaching and learning experience when they were in school. So it may be one of the major factors that will be revealed in the end of our study as our result. So basically, all of this section of literature review, which is 2.1 creationist hypothesis, 2.2 SLA factors, and 2.3 recent studies, are linked to our research according to what we examine it before we put it as our literature review context. This means that each of them different have their own way to be linked to our research. Their result and their concept and their theoretical produce a good framework in order to us to produce a result that that conveys factors influencing low speaking competence among university students. Lastly, to produce our result well and accurate according to our subject and discussion. Last but not least, yes, there are a lot of research according to low English speaking competence conducted by researchers, um, by the past researchers. So, inshallah, we will apply our research carefully step by step in order to produce a good result as well as the previous study. So we will move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 3, that will explain more about how we deal and how we handle our data in order to complete the research. So that's all from me. Thank you and Assalamualaikum. Before that, I'm sorry if there is noises coming from the environment because there is a construction near to my house, and sorry for the blurry camera because my phone camera is not really work well, so I have the laptop camera instead. So wabillahi wal hidayah, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Let's move to the next chapter.
My name is Ilham binti Arhamah. My matric number is 053941, and I'm in charge in chapter 3, which is methodology. In this chapter, there are 6 components, which is the first one is research approach, the second one is sampling, the third one is data collection method, the fourth one data generation procedure, the next one analysis data, and the last one is summary. The first element is research approach. For this research, we are going to use quantitative approach. The main reason why we use quantitative approach for this research is because data are easier to be collected and analyzed, and we are going to collect the data by using questionnaire, and the questionnaire will be distributed to the respondents, which is TESOL UNIZA students. And the questionnaire will be divided into 3 sections, which is the first section is consists respondents' personal information such as gender. And the second one is mainly about respondents' SAFER level, and the last section is to find possible causes to why such problems arise, solution will be listed down, and the respondents are required to pick which solution is the most effective way to improve their speaking skills. And the second element is sampling. For this research, a number of 40 students, 40 TESOL students will be involved. The reason why we choose TESOL UNIZA students is because we don't need to drive or find another university, since we are actually UNIZA TESOL students, and since this research is focusing on low English speaking competence among UNIZA TESOL students, the participants will be the UNIZA student itself who are taking TESOL. And the random sampling will be used while choosing the participants so that everyone in the population would have the chance of being chosen. And the third element is data collection method. For the data for this study will be collected from respondents through questionnaire, and this method has been selected for some reasons, such as having the ability to develop in less amount of time compared to the other data collection method, and it's able to collect data from a large number of respondents, which is our respondents might be in 40 participants from TESOL UNIZA students. So next, the questionnaires are designed in English language, of course, as we are going to have participants among TESOL students, and moreover, students in order to encourage respondents' involvement, we are going to briefly clarify the objective of the study and make it clear to all participants, so that the participants is that involved for the research is anonymous, so that the respondents' identities would be kept. And the third element is data generation procedure. Okay, for data generation procedure, approval will be acquired to the Dean of Faculty involved of UNIZA, which is Faculty Bahasa and Faculty Language and Communication. I'm sorry. So and consent from the students will be obtained. Okay, so once the approval is obtained, the students will then be recruited as participants, and the information given by the students will be secured to make sure of their willingness to contribute to the research. And the fifth element, which is data analysis. So the data collected will be analyzed by using Google Form, and frequency analysis will be used to calculate number of times a particular value of variable, which is a data item, has been observed to occur. Means that analysis, on the other hand, will be used to calculate the average of the factors that influence low English speaking competence among UNIZA TESOL students. And the last element for this chapter is summary, which is the aim of this section is actually to overview the approach as well as the process of the collecting data, because there are most important elements for the research study. And then This will then demonstrate the guidance as to how the research will surely contribute to the achievement to the study. I think that's all for this chapter. Thank you.